The silence in my house used to feel like peace, but lately it has started to feel like an echo. My name is Margaret Collins. I am 59 years old, a widow, and for 20 years, the steady hand behind the desk at Caldwell Walker Law. I've lived my life by a simple code: sacrifice now so they don't have to struggle later. My children, Emily and Luke, were my world. When their father died, I didn't just become a mother, I became a shield. I shielded them from the bills, from the grief, and from the cold reality of a world that doesn't care if you're tired. I worked the extra shifts. I wore the same pair of sensible black shoes for 4 years so Emily could have the designer dress for her formal. I never kept a ledger of what I was owed because you don't charge your heart for beating. But last Tuesday, the ledger was forced open, and I realized I was bankrupt in ways money couldn't touch. It started with an email. No subject line, just Emily Collins, sitting there in my inbox like a routine update. I remember smiling as I reached for my coffee. We had just spent weeks discussing her wedding in Napa Valley. It was going to be the event of the season, the kind of wedding I never had. I had already wired $30,000 to secure the venue she'd dreamed of since she was a girl. I felt proud. I felt included. Then I clicked. "Mom," the email began. Not "Dear Mom," not "Hi Mom," just a label. The words that followed didn't feel like text on a screen, they felt like physical blows. She told me that she, Andrew, and his particular mother had finalized the guest list. They wanted something intimate, something curated, and because of the count, they had decided it was best for me to watch the ceremony via a live stream. She actually wrote the words, "It should be just like being there, LOL." I sat there, the steam from my coffee rising into the cool Oregon air, and I felt something in my chest simply stop. It wasn't a heart attack, it was a realization. The LOL was the sound of 20 years of sacrifice being laughed away. I wasn't a guest. I wasn't the mother of the bride. I was the bank. I was the silent engine that had pushed her to the top of the hill, only for her to kick me back down once she reached the summit. My hands didn't shake. I didn't cry. Instead, I felt a strange, terrifying clarity. For the first time in my life, I saw my daughter not as the little girl I'd tucked in, but as the woman I had enabled her to become. I replied with 4 words. "Sure, enjoy your big day." No explanation, no plea, just a quiet withdrawal of my soul from her life. I closed my laptop, finished my cold coffee, and went to work. The drive to the office was surreal. The Oregon spring was blooming, green and vibrant, but I felt like I was moving through a black and white movie. At the law firm, Robert, my boss, looked at me and asked if I'd seen a ghost. I told him I just hadn't slept well, but the truth was, I had finally woken up. I spent the morning filing motions and organizing calendars, but my mind was at First Federal Bank. I thought about the additional $50,000 I was supposed to wire that afternoon. The final payment. I thought about Andrew's mother, a woman who looked at me like I was the help during our one and only dinner together. I thought about how Emily had stayed silent while that woman critiqued my outfit. And then I thought about that Google Meet link, a live stream, a digital window into a life I had paid for but wasn't allowed to inhabit. By noon, I knew what I had to do. It wasn't about revenge, it was about worth. If I was only worth a digital link to her, then her wedding was only worth what she could afford without me. I walked into the bank at 1 p.m. Carlos, the manager, knew me well. He'd seen me move money for college tuition, for first apartments, for emergencies that usually turned out to be shopping trips Emily couldn't afford. When I told him I wanted to cancel the wire transfer to the Napa venue, he paused. He asked if I was sure. $50,000 is a lot of money for a woman who works at a law firm and lives in a modest house. I looked him in the eye and told him I had never been more sure of anything in my life. The circumstances have changed, I told him, and they had. The Margaret who lived for her children's approval was dead. The woman standing in that bank was someone new, someone who was tired of being a transaction. As I signed the paperwork, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders that I hadn't even realized I was carrying. I walked out into the sunlight, my phone already buzzing in my pocket. Emily's name was flashing on the screen. She was calling, likely to check if the money had landed. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The silence was already starting to speak, and for the first time in decades, I was the one listening. The walk from the bank to my car felt different. The pavement felt more solid beneath my heels. Or perhaps I was just standing heavier, taking up the space I had spent a lifetime trying to shrink. My phone was a frantic weight in my coat pocket, vibrating with a rhythmic desperation that I knew all too well. It was Emily. Then it was Luke. Then a text from Emily. Then another. I didn't look. I didn't need to see the words to know the tone. The shift from, "Mom, did the wire go through?" to, "Mom, why aren't you answering?" is a transition I could plot on a map of her predictable moods. I drove back to the office, the silence of the car acting as a sanctuary. I thought about the $50,000. To Emily and her new circle in Napa, that money was just a line item. A better florist, a more prestigious vintage of wine, a string quartet to play while people who didn't know my name sipped cocktails. But to me, that money was 18 years of skipped lunches. It was the vacation to Italy I never took because Luke needed a down payment on a house he couldn't quite afford. It was the retirement cushion I had thinned out to ensure my children never felt the cold wind of a budget. I had been a martyr for so long that I'd forgotten the fire was supposed to be for warmth, not for burning myself alive. When I sat back down at my desk, Robert was standing by the window. He's a man of few words, the kind of lawyer who wins cases by knowing exactly when to stay quiet. He looked at me, really looked at me, and didn't ask about the work. "Margaret," he said softly, "you've been the heartbeat of this firm since your husband passed. You've looked after everyone here. You've looked after those kids. Maybe it's time you looked after the woman who did all that work." I felt a lump in my throat that I refused to swallow. I didn't cry, but I nodded. He didn't know the specifics of the email, but he knew the silhouette of a woman who had given until she was hollow. He left a fresh latte on my desk and walked away. That simple gesture, a $5 coffee given without expectation, felt more like family than the $30,000 venue deposit I had already lost to Emily's vanity. By the time 5 o'clock rolled around, the sun was starting to dip behind the Oregon pines, casting long, skeletal shadows across the parking lot. I drove home, not to a house of mourning, but to a house of reckoning. I pulled into my driveway and saw the familiar sight of my quiet neighborhood. It was the kind of place where people prune their roses and wave across fences. It was a life I had built with sweat and grit. Inside, the house was dark. I didn't turn on the overhead lights. I walked straight to the kitchen, found a bottle of Cabernet I'd been saving for a special occasion that never seemed to arrive, and poured a glass. I took it out to the back porch. The air was crisp, smelling of damp earth and the coming rain. I finally pulled my phone out. 43 missed calls, 12 texts, 3 voicemails. I played the first voicemail from Emily. Her voice was high-pitched, colored with that specific brand of concerned that actually means inconvenienced. "Mom? The venue just called. They said the final wire was flagged or canceled? There must be a mistake at the bank. Andrew's mom is sitting right here and she's totally stressed out. We need to fix this ASAP because the caterer needs their half by tomorrow. Call me back the second you get this. Love you." "Love you." Those 2 words felt like a counterfeit coin. She didn't love me. She loved the access I provided. She loved the version of me that said yes before she even finished the question. I played the second message. This one was from Luke. "Hey Mom, Emily is losing it. She says you're not picking up. Look, I know things are tense with the wedding guest list thing, but don't take it out on the wedding itself. That's just petty, Mom. Just send the money so we can all move past this. I'll talk to her about the live stream thing later, okay? Just fix it." Petty. My own son, whose mortgage I co-signed, whose first $10,000 of equity came directly from my savings, called my dignity petty. He didn't ask how I felt about being exiled to a computer screen while he walked his sister down the aisle. He didn't ask if I was okay. He just wanted the problem to go away so his life remained comfortable. I leaned back in my chair and watched a hawk circle in the distance. I felt a strange, cold peace. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger requires energy, and I was saving all of mine for my own reconstruction. I took a sip of the wine. It was rich, bold, and slightly bitter, much like the truth. Around 9 o'clock, the headlights of a car swept across my living room wall. I heard the gravel crunch in the driveway. A door slammed. I knew that sound. It was Luke's SUV. He didn't knock. He used his spare key and burst in like the house was on fire. He found me on the porch in the dark. "Mom, what the hell is going on?" he demanded, still in his work suit, his tie pulled loose. "Emily is hysterical. Andrew's parents are talking about calling off the Napa booking. Why aren't you answering your phone?" I didn't stand up. I didn't even turn to look at him. "The phone works fine, Luke. I just chose not to use it." "Chose not to use it? Mom, do you have any idea what you're doing? You're ruining her wedding. Over what? A guest list? You know how Andrew's family is. They're high society. They're intimate ceremony people. It's not personal." "Not personal?" I finally turned my head, my voice as calm as a frozen lake. "To tell the woman who gave birth to her, who raised her alone, who paid for her education and her failed New York dreams, and who is currently paying for the very floor she's standing on in Napa, that she isn't intimate enough to be there? You call that not personal?" "You're being difficult," Luke snapped, pacing the length of the porch. "You've always been the rock, Mom. Why are you crumbling now? Just send the 50 grand. I'll make sure you get a front row seat on the Zoom call. I'll even set up a big screen for you here. Just don't do this to her." I looked at my son, the man I had tried to raise to be honorable, to be grateful, and I realized I had failed. I hadn't raised a man, I had raised a consumer, and I was the product. "Luke," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than a scream. "The money is gone. I didn't just cancel the wire. I've moved the funds into a private brokerage account for my retirement. There is no more wedding fund. There is only my life." The silence that followed was deafening. Luke stopped pacing. His face went pale in the moonlight. You can't be serious. You're going to let her lose the venue? You're going to humiliate her in front of Andrew's family." "She humiliated me with an LOL, Luke. I'm just balancing the books." "You're being a monster," he whispered, his voice shaking with a mix of shock and greed. I stood up then. I was shorter than him, but in that moment, I felt like a giant. "If being a monster means I finally stopped letting you all eat me alive, then I'll wear the title gladly. Now get out of my house." "Mom!" "Get out, Luke, and take your spare key. I'm changing the locks tomorrow." As he walked away, stumbling over his own feet in his haste to go report back to the real family, I didn't feel a single spark of regret. I felt a terrifying, beautiful sense of freedom. The bridge wasn't just burning, I was the one holding the match, and the light was gorgeous. The morning after Luke's visit was the quietest morning of my life. I woke up before the sun, not because of anxiety, but because for the first time in 20 years, I wasn't waking up for anyone else. I didn't have to check if Emily had texted about a crisis or if Luke needed help with his taxes. I made a single piece of toast, brewed a pot of expensive Kona coffee I'd been hiding in the back of the pantry, and sat by the window. The world outside was beginning to stir, but inside my chest, the storm had settled into a cold, hard permafrost. I turned on my phone at exactly 8 a.m. It was like opening a floodgate. The device vibrated so violently against the granite countertop that it nearly skittered off the edge. Dozens of messages. Most were from Emily, but there were several from numbers I didn't recognize, likely Andrew's family or perhaps the wedding planner I had been paying $500 an hour to coordinate my exclusion. I ignored the texts and went straight to my email. There it was. The subject line was no longer empty. It read, "Urgent, please don't ruin my wedding." I clicked it with a steady finger. "Mom," the email began. This time the tone was different. The LOL was gone, replaced by a frantic, breathless desperation. "I know you're upset about the live stream. We can talk about that. We can find a way to make it work. But the venue just called again. They said if the final $50,000 isn't in their account by the end of the business day in Paris, they're releasing our date to a couple on the waiting list. Andrew's parents are beyond upset. They're saying this proves you're trying to control me with money. Please, Mom, don't do this to me. We can talk about you attending the ceremony, but we need the funds first to save the day. Please." I read the line again. "We can talk about you attending a negotiation." My presence at my daughter's wedding, the birth of which I had endured, the life of which I had funded, was now a bargaining chip. I was being offered a seat at the table, but only if I paid the cover charge. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a realization that she had hurt me. It was a ransom note. She was holding her affection hostage for $50,000. I felt a cold laugh bubble up in my throat. I looked at the photo on my mantel, a younger Emily at her college graduation, smiling brilliantly, her arm around my neck. I remembered how much my feet ached that day because I'd worked a double shift the night before to pay for the celebratory dinner. I had been so proud of her. But looking at that photo now, I realized I wasn't looking at a daughter. I was looking at a masterpiece of my own creation. A woman I had taught to believe that the world, and especially her mother, existed only to serve her. I didn't reply. I went to work. At the office, the atmosphere was a stark contrast to the chaos in my pocket. Here, I was Margaret Collins, the woman who kept the firm running. I was respected. I was necessary. Around noon, my desk phone rang. It was the receptionist. "Margaret, there's a Mrs. Sterling on line 2? She says it's about a family emergency." Mrs. Sterling, Andrew's mother, the woman who thought I wasn't intimate enough for a guest list she was curating with my money. I debated letting it go to voicemail, but then I realized I wanted to hear her voice. I wanted to hear the sound of the woman who thought she could erase me. "This is Margaret," I said, my voice as professional and sharp as a fresh razor. "Margaret, dear." The voice on the other end was like honey poured over gravel, sophisticated, condescending, and currently very stressed. "It's Beatrice Sterling. I'm calling because there seems to be a catastrophic misunderstanding with the wedding finances. Emily is quite distraught. She says that you've encountered a liquidity issue?" I smiled. Emily had lied for me. She was too embarrassed to tell her future mother-in-law that her mother had simply shut the vault. "There's no misunderstanding, Beatrice," I said calmly, "and my liquidity is just fine. I've simply decided that my investment in this wedding no longer aligns with my personal interests." There was a long, stunned silence on the other end. I could almost hear Beatrice's brain recalibrating. "I'm sorry? Investment? Margaret, this is your daughter's wedding. We are talking about the social event of Andrew's career. We have people flying in from London, from Tokyo. The venue is non-negotiable." "Then I suggest you pay for it," I replied, "since you were the one who finalized the guest list and decided I was a remote viewer. It seems only fitting that you should be the one to finalize the bill." "Now see here." Beatrice's voice lost the honey. The gravel was all that remained. "We are contributing a significant amount for the rehearsal dinner and the honeymoon. We expected the Collins family to handle the ceremony and the reception. That was the arrangement. The Collins family is just me, Beatrice, and I am no longer part of the arrangement. If the guest list is too small for the mother of the bride, then the budget is too small for my bank account. It's a very simple equation. I'm sure a woman of your particular tastes can understand that." "You are being incredibly selfish," Beatrice hissed. "You are willing to humiliate your daughter over a seat at a dinner table?" "I'm willing to respect myself, Beatrice, something I should have started doing a long time ago. If you want the Napa venue, I suggest you open your own checkbook. Goodbye." I hung up. My heart was thumping, but not with fear. It was the adrenaline of an insurgent. I looked up and saw Robert standing in his office doorway, watching me. He didn't say anything, but he gave me a very slight, very deliberate nod of approval. By 3 p.m., the text from Emily turned from pleading to vitriolic. "I hate you. You are ruining my life. Andrew's dad had to take out a loan to save the deposit. I will never forgive you for this humiliation." I looked at the words, "I will never forgive you." For years, those words would have leveled me. They would have sent me into a spiral of guilt and frantic apologies. But today they felt like a certificate of graduation. If her forgiveness cost $50,000 and my own dignity, then it was a price I was no longer willing to pay. I walked over to my computer and opened a new tab. I didn't look at wedding venues or flower arrangements. I looked at solo cruises through the Greek Isles. I looked at small, charming cottages in the south of France. I looked at the balance of my brokerage account, the wedding fund that was now my freedom fund. Then, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went into the break room, grabbed a piece of cake from a birthday celebration I'd ignored earlier, and sat down to enjoy it. The phone buzzed again. It was Luke. "Mom, Emily just called. She's saying Andrew's parents are forcing them to scale back the wedding to a backyard ceremony at their house because they can't afford the full Napa bill now. She's crying so hard she can't breathe. Are you really okay with this?" I typed back my first long response of the day. "Luke, a backyard wedding sounds lovely and intimate. Since I'm watching on a live stream anyway, the background doesn't really matter to me. I hope the Wi-Fi signal is strong. Enjoy the cake." I hit send and took another bite of my own. It was delicious. The power of no is a strange thing. For most of my life, I treated no like a dangerous weapon, something that would cause the walls to crumble and the people I loved to scatter. But as I sat in my quiet living room that evening, I realized that no wasn't a weapon at all. It was a border. It was the first fence I had ever built around my own soul. The following Saturday morning, a locksmith arrived at 8 a.m. He was a young man with calloused hands and a quiet demeanor. He didn't ask why a woman in a quiet Oregon suburb needed every exterior lock changed and a new security system installed. He just worked. "New start?" he asked as he handed me the heavy ring of silver keys. "Something like that," I said, weighing the keys in my palm. They felt like armor. I had barely closed the door behind him when the driveway sensor chimed. I looked at the monitor. It was Luke's SUV again, but this time, he wasn't alone. Emily was in the passenger seat. I watched them through the camera lens. They looked frantic, their faces tight with a mixture of anger and genuine shock. I saw Luke reach for his spare key, the key he'd carried for years, the key that gave him access to my kitchen, my laundry room, and my peace of mind. I watched him slide it into the lock. I watched his confusion when it wouldn't turn. He tried again, jiggling the handle, his brow furrowing. Then he pounded on the door. "Mom, open up! I know you're in there!" I walked to the door, but I didn't open it. I spoke through the solid oak, my voice steady. "I changed the locks, Luke. I told you I would." "Mom, please." That was Emily. Her voice was thin, stripped of the Napa Valley arrogance. "Mom, we need to talk. We've had to cancel the florist. The photographer is suing us for the remaining balance. Everything is falling apart." "It's not falling apart, Emily," I said. "It's just becoming what you can actually afford. There's a difference." "How can you be so cold?" she shrieked, her palm hitting the wood of the door. "I'm your daughter. This is my one day. Andrew's family thinks you're mentally unstable. They're telling Andrew he should rethink the marriage if this is the kind of family he's joining." That one stung, but only for a second. If Andrew is the kind of man who judges a wife by her mother's bank account, then he's doing you a favor by leaving now, I replied. But I suspect he's just as upset about the lost luxury as you are. "Mom, just let us in," Luke pleaded. "We're family. You can't just shut us out like this. It's not right." What wasn't right was being told to watch my own daughter's life through a screen while I paid for the stage she was standing on, I said. "You two have mistaken my silence for weakness for 20 years. You thought my love was a bottomless well you could keep dipping your buckets into without ever pouring a drop back in. Well, the well is dry." I walked away from the door. I could hear them arguing on the porch, muffled shouts, Emily sobbing, Luke trying to play the peacemaker while clearly being terrified that his own safety net was fraying. I went into the kitchen and turned on the radio. Classical music filled the room, drowning out the noise of the children I had raised to be strangers. By the afternoon, they were gone. I spent the rest of the day doing something I hadn't done since before my husband died. I went shopping for me. I went to a small boutique downtown. I bought a dress that wasn't sensible or office-appropriate. It was a deep midnight blue silk that felt like water against my skin. I bought a pair of shoes that cost more than my first car. I didn't feel guilty. I didn't think about Emily's venue or Luke's mortgage. I thought about the way the light caught the fabric. When I got home, there was a package on my porch, no return address. Inside was a tablet, a high-end, expensive device. Attached was a note in Emily's handwriting. "Since you're so obsessed with the screen, here's a better one to watch the wedding on. We're having it in Andrew's parents' garden now. It's small. There's no room for you, Mom. There just isn't. If you change your mind about the money, the offer to watch the stream still stands. Otherwise, don't bother coming to the house." I looked at the tablet. It was a bribe disguised as a gift, wrapped in a threat. They still didn't get it. They thought this was a tantrum. They thought if they squeezed me hard enough, the old Margaret would reappear, checkbook in hand, begging for a crumb of their time. I took the tablet, walked over to the trash can, and let it go. The sound of it hitting the bottom was the most satisfying thing I'd heard all week. That evening, I called Robert. "Robert," I said when he answered, "you mentioned a while ago that the firm needed someone to oversee the closing of the London merger. You said it would require being on site for 3 months." "I did," Robert said, his voice warming. "But you said you couldn't leave the kids. You said Emily's wedding was coming up." "The wedding is handled," I said, looking at my reflection in the darkened window. I looked older, yes, but I looked sharper. "And the kids are adults. It's time they learned how to live in a world where I'm not the safety net. When do I leave?" 2 weeks, Robert replied. "Margaret, are you sure?" "I've spent 59 years being sure for everyone else, Robert. For the first time in my life, I'm being sure for me." I hung up and felt a surge of electricity through my veins. London. 3 months of fog, history, and work that didn't involve being a mother, a widow, or a bank. But the world wasn't done with me yet. As I started to pack, my phone rang again. This time, it wasn't my children. It was the one person I hadn't expected to hear from. It was Andrew's father, a man who had never spoken more than 10 words to me. "Margaret," he said, his voice sounding tired and uncharacteristically humble. "We need to talk. This isn't just about a wedding anymore. This is about a disaster." The voice of David Sterling, Andrew's father, was a sound I never expected to hear on my private line. In the few interactions we'd had, he was a man of cold nods and expensive watches, a man who looked through you rather than at you. But tonight, the polish was gone. He sounded like a man standing in the ruins of a house he thought was made of stone, only to find it was constructed of cards. "Margaret," he said, and for the first time, he didn't stumble over my name. "I'm calling because, well, to be frank, the situation has moved beyond a simple family spat. We are facing a significant social and financial embarrassment. The Napa venue has retained the initial $30,000 as a cancellation penalty, and because the final wire was pulled so late, the caterer and the florist are threatening legal action for breach of contract." I sat down on the edge of my bed, surrounded by the half-packed suitcases for my London trip. I felt a strange, detached curiosity. "And why is this a phone call for me, David? I believe your wife, Beatrice, made it very clear that the Sterlings were curating this event. Surely a family of your stature has a contingency plan for a few breached contracts." There was a pause, a long, heavy silence that spoke volumes. Beatrice may have overextended our immediate liquid projections. We've had a difficult quarter with the firm. We were counting on your contribution to bridge the gap until the trust matures in the fall. If this wedding scales back to a backyard affair now, after the invitations have been sent to our associates, it will look like a bankruptcy. It will look like a failure. I almost laughed. It wasn't about Emily's happiness. It wasn't about the union of 2 people. It was about the optics of wealth. They had been using my hard-earned savings to prop up a facade of sterling grandeur. I had been the secret foundation for a building I wasn't even allowed to enter. "So you didn't want me at the wedding because I didn't fit the aesthetic," I said, my voice dropping an octave. "But you wanted my money because your own aesthetic was a lie. Is that the gist of it, David?" "That's a harsh way of putting it," he muttered. "Truth is often harsh to those who spend their lives avoiding it," I replied. "The answer is no. I will not be bridging any gaps. I will not be saving your reputation, and I certainly won't be doing it from the comfort of a Google Meet link." "Margaret, think of Emily. She's devastated. She's convinced you've had some sort of breakdown. She's telling everyone you're unwell." If being unwell means I've finally stopped being a doormat, then I hope it's contagious, I said. Tell Emily that if she wants to talk to me, she can try doing it without a price tag attached. But don't hold your breath. I'm leaving for London in 10 days. I'll be gone for 3 months. If she wants to find me, she'll have to look somewhere other than her own reflection. I hung up before he could respond. The air in the room felt lighter. I went back to my packing, folding the midnight blue silk dress with care. 2 days later, the final assault began. I was at the office when the receptionist paged me. "Margaret, your daughter is here. She's very insistent." I walked out to the lobby. Emily was standing there, but she didn't look like the polished bride-to-be I'd seen a month ago. Her hair was messy, her eyes were rimmed with red, and she was wearing an old sweatshirt I recognized from her college days. When she saw me, she didn't scream. She didn't attack. She just slumped into one of the leather chairs and started to cry, real, ugly sobbing. "Mom, please," she gasped. "Andrew's parents are fighting. They're blaming each other. Andrew told me this morning that if we can't have the wedding we planned, maybe we should just postpone it indefinitely. He's embarrassed, Mom. He's embarrassed of me. He's embarrassed of us." I stood over her, looking down at the daughter I had protected from every rainstorm, only to realize I had never taught her how to hold an umbrella. "He's embarrassed of you because the money ran out?" I asked quietly. "Does that sound like a man who loves you, Emily? Or does that sound like a man who is marrying a budget?" "It's not like that," she yelled, looking up, her face twisted. "You don't understand that world. Image is everything to them. You're ruining my chance to be someone. I could have been a Sterling. I could have had a life where I didn't have to work in a law office until my hair turned gray. Why can't you just give me this one thing?" "Because it's not one thing, Emily. It's my life. It's 20 years of my life. And you were willing to trade me, your own mother, for a seat in a world that doesn't even want you if you're poor." "I apologized," she screamed, oblivious to the fact that the entire office had gone silent. "I sent the email. I said we could talk about you coming." An apology with a but is not an apology, Emily. It's a transaction. You told me to watch your wedding on a screen. You told me I wasn't good enough to be in the room. You can't unring that bell with a desperate email sent when the check bounced. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. It was the receipt for the solo cruise I had booked for the week of her wedding. I placed it on the table in front of her. "This is where I'll be on your wedding day," I said. "I'll be in the middle of the Mediterranean. I won't have Wi-Fi. I won't be watching a live stream. I'll be eating dinner at a table where I am a guest of honor, simply because I paid for my own seat." Emily stared at the paper. The realization finally hit her. The money wasn't just delayed, it was spent. It was gone. The safety net hadn't just frayed. I had cut it down and turned it into a sail. "You're serious," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You're actually leaving me." "No, Emily," I said, turning to walk back to my desk. "You left me a long time ago. I'm just finally catching up." As she was escorted out by the security guard, I didn't look back. I sat down at my desk and opened a new file. My heart was heavy, yes, a mother's heart is never truly light, but for the first time in my life, it was beating for me. That night, Luke called. He didn't yell, he sounded defeated. "Mom," he said, "the wedding is off. Andrew called it. He said the drama was too much for his family's reputation. Emily is moving back into her old apartment. She's a mess." "I'm sorry to hear that, Luke," I said, and I meant it. I didn't want her to be in pain, but I knew that some lessons are only learned in the dark. "Is she safe?" "Yeah, I'm with her. But Mom, she has nothing. No deposit, no wedding, no Andrew. She has what she built for herself, Luke, just like I have what I built for myself. I'll be at the airport on Monday. Don't call me to ask for money for her rent. Call me when you're ready to tell me about your day. I'd like to hear about my son's life, not his expenses." I hung up and looked at my suitcase. It was packed. I was ready. The air in London was exactly what I needed, heavy with history, damp with a persistent mist, and entirely indifferent to the drama of the Collins family. I stepped off the plane at Heathrow feeling like a ghost that had finally found a place to haunt. For the first time in 30 years, No one in a 3,000-mile radius knew me as a mother, a widow, or a reliable office manager. To the driver holding a sign with my name, I was simply Ms. Collins, not Mom, just me. The apartment the firm had arranged was in Bloomsbury. It was a small, elegant flat with tall windows that looked out over a quiet square filled with ancient plane trees. I spent my first evening there in total silence. I didn't turn on the TV. I didn't check the local news. I unpacked my midnight blue silk dress and hung it in a wardrobe that smelled of cedar and old paper. I sat by the window with a cup of tea, watching the red double-decker buses crawl through the streets like distant embers. My phone remained off. It sat in my suitcase, a dormant black brick of guilt and expectation. I knew that back in Oregon, the fallout was likely reaching its peak. Emily would be staring at the empty spaces where her grand life was supposed to be. Luke would be trying to balance the weight of his sister's collapse with the rising pressure of his own mortgage. They would be waiting for the weekly Margaret update, the Sunday night call where I checked in to see who needed what and how much it would cost me. But that Sunday, I was walking through the British Museum. I stood before the Elgin marbles, marveling at how something so broken could still be so beautiful. I had spent so much of my life trying to be a whole, unbroken vessel for my children to drink from. I realized now that the cracks were where the light got in. Monday morning at the London office of Caldwell Walker was a revelation. The staff there treated me with a sharp, professional deference. I wasn't the office mom who kept a drawer full of aspirin and snacks for the junior associates. I was the senior consultant sent from the States to fix a multi-million-dollar merger. I was authoritative. I was precise. I was, for lack of a better word, powerful. "Ms. Collins," a young solicitor named Alistair said during our first briefing, "your notes on the indemnity clauses are brilliant. We've been circling that issue for weeks." "It's simple arithmetic, Alistair," I said, leaning back in my leather chair. "You have to know what you're willing to lose before you can decide what you're willing to fight for." I wasn't just talking about the contract. By the end of my second week, I finally decided to turn the phone on. I did it on a Friday night, after a long dinner at a small French bistro where I'd sat alone with a book and a glass of Bordeaux. I expected a deluge of anger. I expected Emily's vitriol and Luke's disappointment. The messages were there, but the tone had shifted. The anger had been replaced by a hollow, echoing sort of desperation. "Mom," a text from Luke read, "Emily lost her job. She was so distracted by the wedding falling apart that she made a massive error in her accounts. They let her go. She's staying on my couch. We don't know what to do. Please call us." Another from Emily. "I'm sorry, okay? I'm sorry about the email. I'm sorry about the guest list. I just wanted everything to be perfect. Now I have nothing. Andrew won't even return my texts. His mom blocked me. Please, Mom, I need you to come home." I looked at the words, "I need you to come home." They didn't mean, "I miss your presence." They meant, "I miss your protection." They were drowning, and they were angry that the lifeboat had decided to go on a cruise. I didn't call. I typed a short, clear message and sent it to their group chat. "I am in London for the next 12 weeks. I am focused on my work. Emily, you are a 32-year-old woman with a degree I paid for. You have the skills to find another job. Luke, you are a grown man. You can help your sister by teaching her how to budget, not by asking me to pay for her mistakes. I am not your safety net anymore. I am a woman living her life. I'll check in again in a month." I turned the phone back off before the 3 dots of a reply could even appear. That night, I went for a walk along the Thames. The South Bank was alive with music and tourists. I watched a street performer playing a violin, the notes rising into the cold night air. I felt a pang of loneliness, a sharp, cold needle in my heart. I miss them. I miss the children they used to be. But I realized that the children they used to be were gone, and the adults they had become were people I didn't particularly like. I had been so busy building a world where they never had to struggle that I had robbed them of the very thing that makes a person strong, the experience of failing and getting back up. By saving them from everything, I had made them capable of nothing. I stopped at a small stall and bought a bag of roasted chestnuts, the warmth seeping through the paper into my palms. I looked out at the lights reflecting in the dark water. I wasn't going back early. I wasn't sending a check. I was going to let them be cold for a while. Not out of cruelty, but out of a desperate, final kind of love. As I walked back to Bloomsbury, I realized I was humming. It was a tune I hadn't thought of in years. It was the song I used to sing to them when they were babies, when the world was small and my love was enough to fill it. Now the world was big, and my love had to be big enough to let them go. But the real test was yet to come, because while I was finding myself in London, the Sterlings were not going away quietly, and they were about to bring the fight to a level I never anticipated. The third week in London brought a change in the weather, a biting wind that swept in from the North Sea, rattling the tall windows of my Bloomsbury flat. It was as if the atmosphere was mirroring the shift in the messages waiting for me. I had been checking my phone only once a week, a boundary that felt like a sanctuary. But on this particular Tuesday, a notification popped up that didn't come from a family member. It was an email from a law firm in San Francisco. Sterling v. Collins, Notice of Intent. I sat at my small dining table, the morning light gray and weak, and read the document. Beatrice and David Sterling weren't just angry, they were litigious. They were threatening a civil suit for breach of verbal contract and damages resulting from financial misrepresentation. They claimed that by promising to fund the wedding, I had induced them to sign contracts they otherwise wouldn't have touched. They were looking for the $50,000 I had withheld, plus emotional distress fees. For a moment, the old Margaret, the one who feared conflict and lived to keep the peace, felt a cold shiver of panic. A lawsuit is a stain. A lawsuit is a loud, public declaration of failure. But then I remembered where I was. I looked at the files on my table, the London merger documents I had been dissecting with surgical precision. I was a senior manager at one of the best law firms in Oregon. I didn't just know the law. I knew how people used it as a bluff. I didn't call Emily. I didn't call Luke. I called Robert. "They're suing me, Robert," I said, my voice remarkably calm as I looked out at the rain-slicked streets of London. "On what grounds?" Robert asked, his tone shifting instantly into lawyer mode. "A verbal promise to pay for a party I was eventually uninvited from," I replied. "They're claiming financial inducement." Robert let out a short, dry laugh. "Margaret, a verbal promise to gift money is rarely enforceable, especially when the conditions of the gift, like, say, being treated with basic human decency, were violated. They're posturing. They're trying to scare you into opening the checkbook because they're broke and embarrassed." "I know," I said, "but I want to do more than just ignore them. I want to end this. I want the Sterlings to understand that they picked the wrong woman to play with." "What do you have in mind?" "I've spent 20 years managing your files, Robert. I know exactly what kind of discovery a suit like this would trigger. If they want to talk about financial misrepresentation, let's talk about theirs. David Sterling mentioned their liquid projections were off. I suspect they've been living on credit and reputation for years. Send a response. Tell them that if they file, we will countersue for the $30,000 I've already lost to their curated guest list, and we will demand a full audit of the Sterling family trusts." "That's a scorched earth policy, Margaret," Robert said, and I could hear the grin in his voice. "I love it." I hung up and felt a surge of something I hadn't felt in decades: power. Not the power of a mother over a child, but the power of a woman who knows her worth and is willing to defend it. The next day, I received a frantic call from Luke. I finally picked up. "Mom, what did you do?" he stammered. "Emily just called me crying. Andrew's dad is furious. He said your lawyer sent a letter that's defamatory. He says you're trying to ruin their family name." "I'm not trying to ruin anything, Luke," I said, leaning back in my office chair at the London firm. "I am simply refusing to be bullied. If the Sterlings want to fight in a courtroom, they can have one. But they should know that I have the receipts, I have the emails, and I have the stamina. Do they?" "Mom, Emily is caught in the middle. She still loves Andrew. She thinks if you just settle this, they might have a chance to fix things." "If Andrew's love for Emily depends on me paying off his father's debts, then it isn't love, Luke. It's a business arrangement, and I am no longer an investor." "You've changed," Luke said, his voice dropping. "You're so hard now." "No, Luke, I'm just solid. There's a difference. For years, I was like water. I took the shape of whatever container you and your sister put me in. I made sure you were never thirsty, never dry. But water evaporates when it's ignored. I've just finally turned into ice. You can't pour me out anymore. I ended the call and went to a meeting. That afternoon, I helped the London team secure a deal that saved the firm $4 million in tax liabilities. I was sharp. I was focused. I was the best version of myself I had ever been. That evening, I did something brave. I went to a high-end department store in Knightsbridge and bought a ticket for a gala at the Victoria and Albert Museum. I went alone. I wore the midnight blue silk dress and the expensive shoes. I walked into the room filled with the intimate and the particular, and I realized something profound. I belonged there just as much as anyone else, not because of my bank account, but because of my presence. I was standing near a sculpture when a man approached me. He was older, with kind eyes and a British accent that reminded me of old library books. We talked for an hour, not about children, not about weddings, not about grief. We talked about art, about the theater, and about the strange beauty of starting over in a city that had seen 1,000 beginnings. For the first time since my husband died, I felt a spark of something that wasn't duty. It was joy. But as I walked back to my flat that night, the fog rolling in off the Thames, I saw a familiar figure standing under the street lamp near my door. It was someone who shouldn't have been in London. It was someone who had traveled 3,000 miles to find the woman they thought they owned. It was Emily. The street lamp cast a sickly orange glow over Emily's face as I approached. She looked small against the backdrop of the heavy London masonry, clutching a cheap suitcase that looked out of place in Bloomsbury. She was shivering, her thin coat no match for the damp British chill. For a split second, a heartbeat of old habit, I wanted to run to her. I wanted to wrap my coat around her and apologize for the weather, for the distance, for the world. But I didn't. I stayed exactly where I was, 10 feet away, a woman in a silk dress who had just come from a gala. "How did you find me, Emily?" My voice was quiet, steady. "Robert's assistant," she croaked, her voice cracking. "I begged her. I told her it was a life-or-death emergency. Mom, I spent the last of my savings on a one-way ticket. I didn't know where else to go." I didn't invite her in immediately. I stood there, looking at my daughter. She wasn't the glowing bride or the arrogant social climber. She looked like a child who had played with matches and was surprised to find her house in ashes. "The lobby," I said, gesturing to the heavy glass doors of the apartment building. "We can talk there." We sat on a velvet bench in the foyer, the quiet hum of the city muffled by the thick walls. Emily looked at my dress, her eyes widening. "You look different," she whispered. "You look like someone else." "I look like me, Emily. You just never bothered to look at me when I wasn't doing something for you." "Mom, please." She started to cry, that familiar, helpless sound. "Everything is gone. Andrew won't talk to me. His parents are suing you and they're telling everyone I'm a fraud. I've lost my job. I've lost my friends. I have nothing." "You have a degree," I said, my voice devoid of the pity she was fishing for. "You have your health. You have your youth. Most people start with far less." "How can you be so cruel?" she snapped, the flash of her old entitlement returning for a brief second. "I'm your daughter. You're supposed to help me. You're supposed to be the one who stays when everyone else leaves." I did stay, Emily. For 20 years, I stayed in a job I didn't love, in a house that felt empty, in a life that was lived entirely for your comfort. I stayed until you told me I wasn't good enough to be in the same room as you on the most important day of your life. You didn't just ask me to stay home. You asked me to stop existing so your aesthetic wouldn't be ruined. I'm just honoring your request." Emily bowed her head, her tears dripping onto her lap. "I made a mistake. I was under so much pressure from Beatrice. She made me feel like if I didn't do everything perfectly, the Sterlings would never accept me. I was scared, Mom." "And so you traded your mother for a seat at their table," I said. "And look what happened. The table was pulled out from under you anyway. Because a life built on someone else's money and someone else's approval isn't a life, it's a performance, and the show is over." "What am I supposed to do?" she sobbed. "I have no money. I have no place to live when I go back." I looked at her, and for the first time I didn't see a crisis I had to solve. I saw a woman who needed to grow up. "You can stay in the spare room for 3 days," I said. 3 days. During that time, you will use my laptop to find a job, any job, back in Oregon. You will call Luke and arrange to move into a studio apartment, not his couch. And you will call the Sterling's lawyers and tell them that if they don't drop the suit, you will testify that you were never promised the money as a contract, but as a gift that they tried to extort from me. "They'll hate me," she whispered. "They already don't love you, Emily. There's a difference." I stood up, the silk of my dress rustling. "After 3 days, you will leave. I am not going back to Oregon with you. I am staying here to finish my work, and when I do come back, things will be different. No more emergencies that involve my bank account. No more assuming my time is your time. If you want a mother, I am here. If you want a benefactor, the position is closed." I walked toward the elevator, and she followed me, dragging her suitcase like a heavy regret. That night, as she slept in the other room, I sat in the dark living room. I felt a strange mix of sorrow and strength. I had finally seen the monster I was so afraid of becoming, the woman who said no. And she wasn't a monster at all. She was just a person with a boundary. The next morning, I didn't make her breakfast. I went to the office and left a list of local recruitment agencies on the table. When I came home that evening, the flat smelled of burnt toast, and Emily was sitting at the table actually working. She looked up at me, and for the first time in years, she didn't ask for anything. "I found a temporary position," she said, her voice small. "Administrative assistant at a firm in Portland. It's not Napa, but it's a job." "It's a start," I said. On the 3rd day, I took her to the airport. At the security gate, she turned to me. She looked tired, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes, a spark of the girl she used to be before she got lost in the glitter of other people's lives. "Mom," she said, "I'm sorry. For the email, for the LOL, for all of it." "I know, Emily. Are you ever going to forgive me?" I looked at the daughter I had almost lost to my own indulgence. "Forgiveness isn't a destination, Emily. It's a road. You've just taken the first step. Keep walking." As I watched her walk through the gates, I didn't feel the urge to pull her back. I felt the urge to turn around and see what London had in store for me. But as I left the terminal, my phone buzzed. It was a message from David Sterling. The lawsuit was dropped, but he included a final bitter line. "You've won, Margaret, but you've lost your family. Was it worth it?" I deleted the message without replying. I knew the answer, and I didn't owe it to him. The weeks following Emily's departure from London were the most productive of my career. The merger was finalized, the contracts were signed, and the partners at the London firm were whispering about a permanent position for me. I had found a rhythm that didn't involve the frantic heartbeat of someone else's crisis. I woke up to the sound of bells from a nearby church. I spent my evenings in galleries, and I learned that I actually liked the taste of solitude when it wasn't flavored with loneliness. But as my 3-month stint neared its end, the old life made one final seductive play to pull me back into the orbit of being the family's emotional and financial anchor. It arrived in the form of an elegant, handwritten letter from Beatrice Sterling. No lawyers, no threats, no gravelly voice, just cream-colored stationery and a tone of deep, practiced humility. "Margaret," the letter began, "David and I have had a long time to reflect. We realize that our passion for our son's future may have clouded our judgment regarding the guest list. It was never our intention to alienate the woman who raised such a remarkable girl. Andrew and Emily have been talking again. They've decided that their love is stronger than the financial hiccups we've endured. They want to try again, a smaller, intimate ceremony in Oregon this summer. We would be honored if you would not only attend but join us in hosting. Let us put the past behind us for the sake of the children." I sat in my Bloomsbury flat, the letter heavy in my hand. It was a masterpiece of manipulation. It offered me the one thing they thought I craved most, the return of my daughter's perfect life and a seat at the table of the elite. It was an invitation to go back to being the Margaret who smoothed things over, the Margaret who paid for the peace. If I said yes, the lawsuit would remain a bad memory. Emily would get her Sterling name. Luke would stop feeling guilty about his sister's collapse. everything would go back to normal. But as I looked at the letter, I realized I didn't want normal. Normal was the slow erosion of my soul. I waited until Sunday to call Emily. She answered on the second ring. She was in her new tiny studio apartment in Portland. I could hear the sound of a distant siren and the hum of a refrigerator. "Mom?" she said, her voice sounding older, more grounded. "Did you get the letter from Beatrice?" "I did," I said. "She says you and Andrew are talking again. Is that true?" There was a pause. "We are. He's trying, Mom. He says his parents are willing to forgive everything if we just move forward together. He wants the wedding. He says it won't be in Napa, just a nice place in the valley. He told me his dad is willing to help with the costs if you match their contribution." The hook was set. Match the contribution. They weren't asking for my presence. They were asking for my re-entry into the partnership of their pretension. "And what do you want, Emily?" I asked. "Do you want to marry a man whose love requires a matching contribution from your mother?" "I just want things to be okay again," she whispered. "I'm tired of being broke, Mom. I'm tired of taking the bus. I'm tired of working 40 hours a week just to afford a place where the heater barely works. If I marry Andrew, all of this goes away. We can be a family again, all of us." "We are a family right now, Emily," I said firmly. "I am your mother and you are my daughter. That doesn't change based on your zip code or your last name. But if you're asking me to buy your way back into a world that threw you away the moment the check bounced, the answer is no." "Mom, please, it's just one more time. After this, I'll never ask for anything else. I promise." "You've made that promise before, Emily, and I've made the mistake of believing it. If Andrew loves you, he will marry you in a courthouse tomorrow with nothing but a $10 ring. If he needs a matching contribution to see your value, then he is a man you should be running away from, not toward." "You're so selfish," she suddenly snapped, the old Emily flaring up like a dying ember. "You're sitting in London, living in a fancy flat, buying silk dresses, and you're watching me struggle. You're enjoying this, aren't you? You're enjoying the fact that I'm down here while you're up there." "I'm not enjoying your struggle, Emily, but I am enjoying my own life. And for the first time, I realize those two things are not the same. I am not responsible for the consequences of your choices. You chose a man who values optics over essence. You chose to exclude your mother for a curated list. Now you have to choose if you want to be a woman who earns her life or a woman who begs for it." "I hate you," she sobbed, and this time the words didn't even sting. They were just noise. "I love you, Emily," I said. "That's why I'm saying no. I'm giving you the gift of your own strength, whether you want it or not." I hung up and walked over to my desk. I picked up Beatrice's cream-colored letter and tore it into small, neat squares. I dropped them into the wastebasket and felt a profound sense of closure. The last temptation had failed. The bridge wasn't just burned, the river beneath it had changed course. The next day, Robert called. "The London firm made a formal offer, Margaret. They want you to stay as the Director of International Operations. It's a massive raise, a housing allowance, and a seat on the executive board. But you'd have to live there for at least 2 years. What should I tell them?" I looked out at the London skyline. I thought about my house in Oregon, the quiet neighborhood, the roses I used to prune, the kitchen where I'd spent so many years waiting for phones to ring. Then I thought about the woman I had become in Bloomsbury, the woman who knew the name of every barista at the local cafe, the woman who had a date next Tuesday with a man who liked to talk about history. "Tell them yes, Robert," I said. "But tell them I need 2 weeks back in Oregon first. I have some things to sell, and I have one final dinner to host." "A dinner?" Robert asked. "With the kids?" "No," I said, a small smile playing on my lips. "For me, to celebrate the woman who finally showed up." As I prepared to pack for my trip home, I realized I wasn't going back as a mother returning to the nest. I was going back as a traveler visiting a place she used to live. The power was no longer in the money or the sacrifice. It was in the fact that I no longer needed their permission to be happy. The flight back to Oregon felt shorter than usual. Perhaps it was because my mind wasn't racing with a list of things to fix or fires to put out. I landed at PDX with a single suitcase and a sense of purpose that felt as sharp as the crisp Pacific Northwest air. I didn't call Luke for a ride. I didn't alert Emily to my arrival. I took a car service straight to my quiet neighborhood, watching the familiar pines go by with the detached affection one has for a childhood home they've long since outgrown. When I pulled into my driveway, the house looked smaller than I remembered. It was just a building of wood and glass, not the fortress of sacrifice I had once imagined. I spent the first few days quietly. I contacted a real estate agent. I organized the attic. I sorted through decades of memories, keeping only what fit in my heart and letting go of what had weighed down my hands. On my final night in Oregon, I did something I hadn't done in months. I invited Emily and Luke over for dinner. I told them there would be no talk of money, no talk of weddings, and no talk of the Sterlings. I told them it was a farewell. They arrived looking wary, like animals sensing a change in the wind. Luke had lost some of the youthful arrogance in his face. His mortgage was now his own to carry, and the reality of adulthood had etched a few lines around his eyes. Emily looked different too. She was wearing a simple, professional blouse from a thrift store, and her hair was pulled back in a neat, sensible bun. She looked tired, but for the first time in years, she looked real. I served them a simple meal, a roast chicken with vegetables from the local market. For the first hour, the conversation was stiff, a series of polite questions about the weather in London and the details of my new job. But as the sun began to set, casting that long, golden Oregon light across the dining table, the pretense finally broke. "So, you're really selling the house, Mom?" Luke asked, his voice thick with a sudden boyish vulnerability. "Where are we supposed to go for the holidays? Where is home?" I looked at my son, then at my daughter. "Home is wherever you build it, Luke. I've built mine in London now, and you two are building yours here. This house was a gift I gave you while you were growing up. But you're grown now. You don't need a monument to your childhood anymore. You need your own foundations." Emily reached for her wine glass, her fingers trembling slightly. "I thought you were just punishing us, Mom, for the email, for the way we treated you. I thought if I suffered enough, you'd eventually say enough and come back to save me." "I know you did, Emily," I said softly, "but that would have been the greatest cruelty of all. If I had saved you, I would have been telling you that you weren't strong enough to save yourself, and I know you are. I see you working that job. I see you living in that apartment. You're doing it. It's hard and it's messy, but it's yours." "Andrew called me yesterday," Emily whispered, looking down at her plate. "He said his parents would pay for everything if I could just get you to sign a statement for the court. I told him no." I felt a surge of pride that far outweighed any professional achievement I'd ever had. "You did?" "I did," she said, a small, sad smile touching her lips. "I told him that my mother wasn't an ATM, and I wasn't a bargain. We haven't spoken since. I think it's finally over. And for the first time, I don't feel like I'm dying. I just feel like I'm starting." The rest of the evening was spent in a way we hadn't experienced in years. We talked about their father. We laughed about old camping trips where it rained the entire time. We talked about the future, not as a series of financial goals, but as a series of experiences. There were no demands. There were no expectations. There was just a mother and her adult children sitting in the quiet of a house that was about to belong to someone else. When it was time for them to leave, I walked them to the door, the one with the new locks. Luke hugged me first. He held on a little longer than usual. "I'm proud of you, Mom," he whispered into my hair. "It took me a while to see it, but I'm proud of you." Emily stood by her car, the cool night air ruffling her hair. She didn't ask for a check. She didn't ask for a deposit. She just looked at me and said, "Send me pictures of London, okay? Not just the monuments. I want to see the cafe where you go. I want to see the woman you are when you're just Margaret." "I will, Emily. I promise." I watched their taillights fade into the distance, and for the first time, I didn't feel the urge to follow them. I went back inside, closed the door, and turned the key. The next morning, I handed the keys to the real estate agent and took a taxi to the airport. As the plane lifted off, banking over the green hills of Oregon and heading toward the Atlantic, I looked out the window. I thought about the $50,000 in my brokerage account. I thought about the $30,000 that was gone forever, a small price to pay for the freedom I now possessed. I wasn't the woman who watched from a screen anymore. I wasn't the LOL at the end of someone else's joke. I was the protagonist of my own story, flying toward a city that didn't care about my past, only my presence. I opened my laptop, but I didn't check my email. I didn't look for messages from my children. I opened a blank document and began to write. Not a ledger of debts, not a list of sacrifices, but a plan. A plan for a life that was finally, beautifully, and entirely my own. The sun rose over the horizon, flooding the cabin with a brilliant, blinding light. I took a deep breath, leaned back in my seat, and for the first time in 59 years, I simply enjoyed the ride.